And you, thanks, Sean. I jumped the gun there. Hello, everybody. Welcome to day 3. This is our plenary on building alliances. We're going to be hearing from Stacy Davis Gates, members of the Debt Collective and union community and student activists. As a reminder, please use a chat function to post comments and questions. Remember to be respectful and practice inclusion in your comments. You can find the closed captioning function at the bottom of your screen at the More button. We are recording this session. Please do not attempt to record it on your own. So everybody, please help me welcome Stacy Davis Gates. Stacy Davis Gates has served as the political and legislative director for the Chicago Teachers Union for the past 6 years. While at CTU, Ms. Davis Gates has been the architect of bold political and legislative campaigns for the schools and city that all Chicagoans deserve. She has raised millions of dollars to elect classroom teachers to all levels of local government and to challenge school privatizers and union busters. Ms. Davis Gates has also spearheaded successful statewide legislative campaigns to pass the strongest charter school accountability measures in the country, to restore the bargaining rights of Chicago public school employees, and to fully fund public education by ending tax loopholes for the 1%. In 2017, Ms. Davis Gates was elected to the chair of United Working Families, an independent political organization by and for working class people and our movements. She also serves on the board for ACRE, the Action Center on Race and the Economy, a nexus for organizations working at the intersections of racial justice and Wall Street accountability. Ms. Davis Gates is currently on leave from the classroom, where she taught high school social studies for over a decade at Inglewood and Clemente High Schools and Mason Community Links High School. She attended St. Mary's College, the University of Notre Dame, and Concordia University. Ms. Davis Gates lives on the south side of Chicago with her husband and 3 children. She is, I want to say thank you for being here. Sorry about that. And let everybody welcome Stacy Davis Gates. I'll stop talking now so we can hear who we came to hear.
Hey, continue to talk. This is all, I should have said I didn't want to talk for 20 minutes. I actually like to engage more than I like to do this. As you heard in the intro, I'm a teacher. And if we're doing this instructional thing well, it means that we're engaging with students and we're sharing ideas, and we're facilitating process where others are able to bring their experience, their knowledge, their expertise, their brilliance into the discussion. And so sometimes I feel like when we do this, we're taking up too much space. But I really appreciate the opportunity to engage with you all. Thank you so very much for having me here. And I think folks want to talk to me or hear me talk about how we do work here in Chicago that reflects a couple of things. Common good bargaining, I think, is the umbrella for all of it, the basis under which we engage. I think who we engage in and the lens in which we advocate. So there's this woman, her name is Karen Lewis. And I speak about Karen in the present tense because I think it's important for us to acknowledge that while she has transitioned, her legacy is still living and breathing. And so how I'll begin this is that Karen Lewis told a group of educators who have been turned around in their school communities, and turning around folks in their school communities means that you fire everyone there, you start all over again with another staff, another faculty, everyone, from the lunch lady to the principal. In Chicago, that meant that everyone Black in that building was fired. Ironically, we have just settled a multi-million-dollar lawsuit with the Chicago Public Schools with that practice because it harmed more Black people than not. So there's a settlement we just pulled out of that. So that's one thing. 2, school closings. Schools were being closed on Black and brown families. here in the city. You don't just close schools on children, you close schools on families, on communities. And children have, obviously the most impact from that, or absorb the most impact from that. And you had this thing called school deform. Karen coined it. Others will say the R word, but she said it very well, in that it was deform. And that the deform meant that you were saying in one breath that the societal issues, poverty, white supremacy, the impacts of racism, segregation, redlining, all of those things matter. But we have to look past them and penalize the people who have been victimized by these things. That's deform, that's not reform. And that's what we were experiencing here. And it wasn't just me at Inglewood High School who heard Arnie Duncan tell her that we have failed the children who were going to that high school. There were a whole bunch of us all across the city experiencing the same thing. And we decided, as a group of teachers who didn't feel supported, protected, valued, visible, that we were going to get together and figure out how to fight for our union. And so clinicians, paraprofessionals, school clerks, teachers' assistants, we all got together and we took over our union. But the idea of taking over our union was never about this narrow focus on how do we have power. The focus was to expand the definition of labor and union and say out loud, how do we invite membership from those who are inside of our school community and also in the communities where our schools are anchored. So when I say common good bargaining, it is reflective of the entire community and those who need advocacy, funded advocacy, organizing amplified, because there are resources. Now, make no mistake, there were people here in Chicago doing work on housing, on education, pushing against poverty, calling for jobs, demanding healthcare. I mean, we have a trauma center at the University of Chicago, not because of union, but because of a group of Black children who watched their classmates and their friends die and not have a trauma center, a major trauma center for when they were harmed to go to. And so those young people figured out how to get a trauma center here in the city on the south side of Chicago. So we were coming into a space that already existed with people who were in love with justice, deeply committed to people, and expanding the definition of the many. So we found a home. The unionists found a home in a space with community people who were organizing, who were making demands, and quite frankly, who were doing an awesome job. We saw our space as allies, as amplifiers, as people who could continue to help them throw punches, as people who could be a part of a movement that could call in more equity and more justice, because we were also being impacted by that. Now, this is a different way of organizing in the Chicago Teachers Union, because in the years immediately preceding Karen, Jesse, Michael, and Christine, it had been an accommodationist space where the contracts reflected raises, but then the work sites were disappearing. Black teachers, Black paraprofessionals were disappearing. Black women didn't have jobs. At the same time, affordable housing was being ameliorated in the city, right? So Black families were being exited forcefully from the city of Chicago. And so you can think about this in terms of how do you fight back for your own individual, your particular survival, or you could think about this in a way that how do you fight back as a community to not just preserve, but to create imagine, dream, secure that which you need that does not exist yet. And so that is the work that Karen, as leader of our union, with our union, with our community, with our families, with our students, imagine, and we worked for it. Consequently, we have a way of thinking about this work inside of our union that is sacrosanct. I think it was on full display in 2019 in ways that I think triggered both a tremendous amount of admiration, love, and then also an opposition, right? Because we said we have 20,000 or more students who do not have permanent housing. We need some stability for them. And what we said out loud is that in the city, because our school district is under mayoral control, we don't have an elected school board here. So one could make a very cogent case that the mayor, who's in charge of housing, who's in charge of public safety, who's in charge of public education, who's in charge of public health, who's in charge of virtually everything from development in this community, in all of our communities, could work with us to make sure that our students had housing, that their families had stability. Simultaneously, and I think it is also important to add, because it's connected to earlier points that I've made, that 60% of our students who are homeless in this city are Black, which is connected with the erasure of affordable housing, right? So think about it like that. Part two, Donald Trump was our president, right? And we saw all of the photographs, we read all of the headlines, and not only seeing photographs and headlines, we were also experiencing parents dropping off their children, but not being available to pick their children up after school because of his policies. So these are all things that impact our school communities, our classrooms, but more importantly, the children who are experiencing the racism, the lack of fill in the blank. And so because we bargain for the common good, because we are allies and partners with members of our community groups, we put all of this into demands for a contract. Our most powerful moments as a union are always with respect to a contract fight. We wanted to extend our most powerful moments as a movement of educators in a union to the collective bargaining space. And you don't do that alone. You do that with the community. And so you saw these issues come up and the opposition was fierce. These things don't belong in a collective bargaining agreement. How dare you mention these in a collective bargaining agreement? We don't have the wherewithal or the bandwidth to do these things. Now, obviously, there are other things in that contract. Wages and benefits matter, especially when you're living in a city where the cost of living continues to rise, right? Healthcare and the rising cost of that too matters. So we don't say bread and butter and put a period at the end of it. We say the entire buffet. We want the bread, we want the butter, we want the sour cream on the baked potato, we want the steak, we want the chicken, we want the vegetables, we want the green lettuce, we want everything. Because all of those things, if we're paying attention to it, help to edify your body as a human being. And so if we're looking at a collective bargaining agreement as an opportunity to strengthen your school community, you cannot leave out the fact that our children are dealing with unprecedented traumas. There are shootings. Our children are being killed. Every time you read a headline about the violence in Chicago, understand that that is connected to a family of individuals, human beings. And there are children in those families, and they bring that trauma into their school communities. What do you do with that trauma, right? If you are not trained to address that trauma. So we needed a social worker, at least one in every building. We needed a nurse, at least one in every school building. So these are the things that we enumerate. And we also say, how about class size? We know that it will be better for us to have a smaller class size because all the research tells us that. And if, like me, you're a practitioner, you know it is much easier to maneuver in a classroom setting when you can see your students and interact with them on a one-to-one basis. So we use our collective bargaining agreement with the ratification and the verification and the votes of our members, because that's the other thing. You don't lead a transformative union without first organizing your members to the idea of justice. And in a teachers union, it is something very special to do, because I've yet to meet an educator who said they were going to become a teacher because they wanted to make the big bucks. Every single time I speak to an educator, what they tell me is that they want to change the world. They want to make the world better for their students. They want to facilitate a process that gives their students the opportunity to be whomever they think they want to be. A process that gets them an opportunity to dream and to imagine a world without limitations. And so these are people who are already deeply invested in other human beings. And so having the discussion, now I will say that the discussion that we have with our members has to be ongoing, right? And it made it even more of a thing in the pandemic, which I'll get to just a second later. But in 2019, you have a situation where you already have a group of people who understand the needs of the students that they are with every single day. So you don't have to sell them. You have to organize them, right? You have to hear them. You have to create the thing that they believe and understand that's going to actually help them in the short and the long term, facilitate a process that impacts their students and the families that they serve. That has been our work. And when you see all these red shirts on picket lines or downtown Chicago, you see people who are willing to say, I became a teacher because it was absolutely important for me to be a part of changing the world. And when I became a teacher and went to a classroom, I realized, one, how isolating that space could be. Two, that the solidarity of other educators in that entire building matters. And that three, if we do it together, we fight together, we say the thing that we need together, that we have a better chance of securing that thing. Then they also found out that you still can't do all of it by yourself, that there are community groups who were there before you, who may be there after you, that have a better idea of what these experiences are, the prescription for the things that ail the community, and quite frankly, the love for those children in similar ways that we have love for the children that are there. The biggest part of this type of unionism, in my humble opinion, is that we get to see each other's humanity. And we get to invest in loving each other in ways that this work often wards off because it is so high paced, fast paced, and brutal, quite frankly. Now, I would say the 19th strike was successful. Class size, a nurse in every building, a social worker in every building, right? Sanctuary protections for our immigrant students. Some resources and support for our families that are experiencing homelessness. Those are things that came in a contract that also raised the wage floor for Black and Brown women who serve as school clerks and teachers' assistants in our building. So we are helping to narrow the wage gap between women and men. Think about it like that, because that's what unions actually do, while also addressing the needs for immigrant families who sometimes were afraid to send their children to school because they didn't know if they would be protected in that school building. So you can do both and. Again, the buffet is available to us if we can imagine it, if we can organize around it, if we can demand it, and we can put action to it. Now you can imagine that this turns the collective bargaining process upside down. Now do this, put COVID on top of it, right? Put a pandemic that is disproportionately impacting the students' families that we interact with on a daily basis. Put it on top of a non-existent public health infrastructure. Put it on top of the fact that we have no idea what we're doing. We have no idea what we're experiencing. Put it on top of the fact that we didn't even know how to do Zoom, much less provide instruction to little people on Zoom. And this is what leadership in our union has been over the past couple of years. I heard Santita Jackson say something. She said, COVID is a snitch, that COVID has snitched on the safety net in this country being non-existent. And what it also exposed is how much we use our school communities to hide it. Shelter, food, childcare. So when you hear all of the fierce pushback against remote learning or anything connected to the shifts that had to be made during this time, what it does is tell people out loud that schools, and by way of schools, I mean principals, I mean teachers, I mean teachers' assistants, school clerks, security guards, lunch ladies, everyone in that building has been serving multiple roles for the children and the families that attend that school community. But instead of our society saying, whoa, thank you, Jesus, we have to do better, what we received is put the duct tape back on and let's get on with it. So this presents a very challenging situation in this moment, that you have actual human beings who have turned themselves inside out to figure out how to still provide education in a new medium overnight, while also surviving the pandemic, while also being parents, while also having childcare issues, while also suffering losses of friends and family and so forth, that now you have to continue to fight for your survival and the survival of the children and the families. We know that our students live in multi-generational homes. We know that there are older family members often facilitating childcare and child raising for our students. So we knew that we couldn't just negotiate a safety agreement based on the needs of the people who pay union dues, but we had to negotiate this based on the principles of equity and justice, of not being colorblind, because the impact of COVID has been different depending on your socioeconomic bracket, depending on your level of education, depending on your zip code, depending on this man-made construct of race, that all of those things are different. And so how do you do this? Well, I think the lens we used at the Chicago Teachers Union was we do it together. So you saw members and community groups setting up mutual aid spaces that fed families, that provided baby formula and Pampers, that figured out how to meet people's needs. In the contract that we won in 2019, we extended sustainable community schools. Sustainable community schools is a space where community, everyone inside of the school community and the community are together, and they figure out how, right? They figure out how to interact, how to meet the needs of the students, how to provide a broader curriculum and more opportunities for co-curricular and extracurricular activities. It is an antidote to the schools of form that we've seen of the 90s and the early 2000s. That being said, those places perhaps were the most prepared to meet the needs that everyone, including our members, had in these moments, right? Because they already have formulated the relationships. They already built trust around the relationships. They already understood the needs of the families that they serve. So they were ostensibly the best prepared groups of people to activate in a time of crisis. So our gamble in 2016 and in 2019 that we could create sustainable community schools was actually the thing that held people down during a global pandemic that has killed about 1 million Americans, right? A collective bargaining agreement, and I want to make this clear, created the basis of support, structure, love, sustenance for people during a pandemic, because community allyship was built into a collective bargaining agreement. So this whole concept of common good for Black union leadership is also essential, right? Often we see labor leadership in two ways, in whiteness and in gender, and gender being the men, males, right? You don't necessarily see it in a Black girl from Indiana who landed on the south side of Chicago doing this work with a loud mouth about what we deserve and we're gonna take it if we don't get it, right? My voice, my leadership, and this is important, if we ever hope to diversify who gets to lead, and more importantly, how they get to lead, you have to anchor it in the community. You have to anchor it in racial justice. You have to anchor it in gender equity. And common good bargaining, a reliance on the communities in which we originate, quite frankly, is the only way that you can be held up. Because if we're trying to fit people like me into a construct of business top-down unionism, then we lose, right? Because maybe they won't be able to hear or see me. But I can tell you, you can hear and see women when you see red shirts on the streets of Chicago. You can see and hear women when we are pushing back forcefully and demanding the thing that we need en masse. You don't hear or see me as a singular, and quite frankly, who cares about Stacy Davis Gates? You care about Stacy Davis Gates, member of the Chicago Teachers Union. You care about us in terms of our unity and our union and our solidarity. You can't just see me, you see us. So these pronouns of we and us become acutely necessary when women lead, when women of color lead, and when non-traditional spaces of leadership have to push up against white supremacy and patriarchy, right? That you need a team, you need unity, you need shared values and principles that have to extend beyond the walls of your local state, your local union or your state fed or your international. So this is what I'm gonna assert. Number one, not post-COVID, but during the time of COVID, we have to have a sense of community. That community is how you define union. Number two, if you ever hope to make any type of transformative change in any institution or organization in this country, it has to come with community, and union has to bend itself to the will of the community. And finally, if you need to see leadership that doesn't look white or male, you have to also see community, because that is where we get our superhero powers from and are able to build strong supportive networks of your most non-traditional leaders. Thank you.
Stacy, thank you so much. Sean, can you come take us off mute so we can say thank you out loud? So
Go
much.
for it.
Thank
Bravo.
you.
Thank you.
Thank
Bravo.
you.
Thank you, Stacy.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
That was wonderful. Thank you.
Thank
It
you.
That was great.
We wanted you to come and show us how we get free. We want to follow your example, and you did that. Thank you so much, Stacy. Really appreciate you taking the time to talk with us today at HELU. I want to invite Eleni and Jason to come up, and we're going to have a conversation with the Debt Collective, and I'll get out of the way. Thank you again, Stacy Davis Gates. Really appreciate that. I'm turning it over to Eleni and Jason.
Hey, everybody. Great to be here. My name is Eleni, and I am right now working as an organizer with the Debt Collective. And Jason and I today, we're going to take a second to introduce ourselves, but what we're here, it's really exciting to be here to follow up and be in conversation with the amazing points that Stacy just raised and the legacy that CTU offers to all of us in the labor movement, to think about how to expand this vision of what unions can and need to be doing in order to get free. So we're going to be raising a kind of provocative point about why debt. Jason and I are going to raise a few points to think about why debt is necessary to be included in labor movements and labor struggles. Jason, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hey everybody. Tons of familiar faces / names / connections here, and we're in the room with a ton of power. And it's an honor to be thinking and struggling with y'all. So thank you for the opportunity to speak. I'm at Westchester University and I'm with the Debt Collective, sorry.
So I just want to give like a quick personal note about how I kind of came to be here today, which is that I did my PhD at Madison, UW-Madison, and most of that time was under Scott Walker's Wisconsin. And during that point in time, I learned a lot of lessons in how labor movements get broken by conservative politicians. And much solidarity to my fellow TA members on this call and out in the world. There's a lot to be said about that, but one of the things that really clicked for me was when I began to look into these issues of how much universities are structured on debt, I began to realize that Scott Walker, in some ways, was really truly he was a middleman in this bigger struggle, austerity struggle. And that the power of creditors and credit to determine institutional priorities, to determine the ways that our students go through education and the kinds of conditions that we're working in institutions, it really shifted my analysis. And so I'm excited here to share some of those notes with y'all today.
Yeah, and just in terms of how I came into this whole debt struggle, I mean, to be totally frank, I could tell you about how I studied it and blah, 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 and I was in Occupy Wall Street and strike debt. But the true story is, I'll tell you how I really got into this. I watched my dad, who was a K-12 teacher, bust his ass every day, 7 days a week, working as a teacher, working at at the time, Venture, which was like some Kmart store. I watched my mom, who was the secretary, same thing. And then I watched my dad get screwed over by the same system and go into health emergency. And then I watched, because of debt, Wells Fargo take everything that he owned and we own. And to be totally straight, I think I'm in this because I want some payback. I feel like financial capital owes not just me, but a ton of other people, and especially people on this call. So I think honestly, there's a lot of personal reasons why I'm engaged in debt struggle. And yeah. Nothing too sophisticated, but whatever. So should we get into it?
Let's do it.
All right, so the first thing that we want to talk about is to try and frame this issue of like why debt needs to be part of labor struggles. I actually want to start off, go off script a little bit, and just something that Stacy said about bargaining for the common good. I think it's important for us to think about what would it mean if in our bargaining for common good efforts, we put debt in some of these negotiations. I know Donna Murch, who's a friend and comrade, is on this call, and she often talks about the needs of bringing parents into the struggle around universities. And I think like one way to definitely work on that would be to talk about with parents, like, what would it mean if we were struggling to relieve you of some of your debts? Obviously that goes for students and otherwise, but I think this is debt is one way to include communities in bargaining for common good frameworks. I mean, even in Chicago public schools are paying $600 million a year in debt service to Wall Street. So it's like, what does it look like to build coalition? And to think of education, not just student debt, but education debt as a K through 20, whatever, graduate school struggle. So there's the whole terrain of education is a debt struggle. And I think it's something for us to think about as we go through this. More specifically, though, on some of the questions around like why does debt and a labor struggle, to put this in simple terms, and this I'm borrowing from George Kafinsis, a longtime friend, debt is a way to guarantee labor for capital. And what does that mean? It's because when you're in massive debt or any type of debt, you have to work all the time. And it demands and it makes a work be like some of the worst jobs we can possibly imagine. Or sometimes people, a lot of contingent faculty are students working over 40 hours a week to service debt. So it's pretty clear that debt is a labor issue when you think of it as a way that it guarantees labor for capital, and it guarantees exploitable labor for capital. You have to work in order to pay those debts. You can't fall behind. So along those lines, it also debt robs our free time. And we all know the history of labor. Labor, has always been a struggle for free time. If we're not fighting for time, sometimes it's worth asking, like, what are we fighting for? And we know how bad people need time right now, especially now. COVID came up. People are at wit's end because we don't have flipping time to like take care of ourselves. So again, like debt is one of the ways that capital robs our time, and labor needs to rob it back. Along those lines, debt is a way to discipline the worker. And what do I mean by that? Like debt is a tool whereby when you're indebted, you become perhaps less willing or less able to really engage in protest. If you get arrested, if you get a record, you get fired, you're screwed. You can't pay your debts. And so, those of us that know the history of higher education know that like student debt comes out of or is a response to the movements in the 1960s. When the Trilateral Commission says there's too much democracy on campuses, one of the ways you take care of that is by saying, well, put the students in debt, jack tuition, gut funding, put those students in debt, and they will become much more docile. And so debt is a way to discipline the labor movement, you could even say. In fact, Chicago Teachers Union, when it wins its strikes, the credit rating agencies drop the rating of the district loans ability. So it's like, again, this whole disciplining apparatus. Not only that, but even if we win wage increases, and if those wage increases always go to our creditors, what the hell did we fight for? And I know I'm simplifying things here, but still, like, think about it. If we win a wage increase and all my wage increase is going to go to pay some student loan or some credit card bill or whatever, like, there's something wrong there, right? So like, we got to keep this in mind too as labor movements. And then obviously, it's really important to stress how this is disproportionately impacting in higher ed, our contingent faculty, our students, our staff, how this is a gendered and racialized issue, especially student debt. We know American Association of University Women, 66% of the student loan debt, the 1.8 trillion debt, is held by women. When you break that down by race, you see, according to the report, 57% of Black women are having trouble paying their student loans and doing things like buying food, paying for healthcare, or housing. So all these issues we can attack through an intersectional way and build power in labor unions by addressing the debt issue. And I'll pass it on to Eleni.
Absolutely. I think one of the ways so if we can take Jason's points, keep those points in mind, that debt is sort of a crucial dimension of labor struggle. How does labor fight back against debt? It's very easy in this work. And I think Jason and I would be the first to say that it's once you start putting your debt goggles on, it's very easy to see debt everywhere and understand how totalizing the creditors' power have over virtually everything, from our the schools that we go to, the healthcare we have to provide, the healthcare that we need, our housing, and then the task becomes, so how do we fight back against that? So one of the things that I think is really crucial that makes debt different from other kinds of expenses that people have is that it has to get paid first. That we're seeing right now that creditors take a first cut of our resources. And this is one of the things that makes debt not just an issue about not having enough money, but not having enough power. So in the debt collective, we sometimes say alone our debts are a burden, but together they make us powerful. And I think it's really important to think about that in higher education, when we see our institutions sort of crushed by debt, and also our students and ourselves as precarious academics, as contingent faculty, as full professors who are still struggling to pay student loans. How do we center this into our labor movement, so we can use this as a point of power? So, I think one of the things that we can think about is that a sort of a horizon that I think labor movements together that we should be working towards is, what would it look like if the terms of debt were part of our collective bargaining program? A real vision for bargaining for the common good isn't just puts debt on the table. Right now, creditors just get to write bond covenants that put, first claims of resources on our wages, on, we're at people's Social Security is being garnished by student debt payments right now. What if those terms of debt were actually part of what labor unions went to the bargaining table over? So that's kind of point number one that I think is a really critical horizon for labor movements to be keeping in mind in this struggle against debt. And then the second, and this is probably the most important, is to keep always at our center is advancing the vision of a world without debt. So what would it look like if we talked about how to reduce student debt, but how to make college free for everybody? And I think that is like those two pieces are really important to go together. Free college is the best way to solve the student debt crisis. But until we have free college, we also have to deal with the student debt crisis. So one of the things that for the next few minutes, I think Jason and I are going to really try to talk about how the student debt crisis is probably the most pressing debt issue facing higher education today, but it's hardly the only one. I think when we think about what housing debt is, what healthcare debt, what our institutions are indebted, it's a lot of interlapping problems. But student debt cancellation today is acutely urgent, and not because it's necessarily more important than any of these, but because there's a real chance for victory on the table. At a time when our, leftist movements are being pushed back, we're having all kinds of potential legislative victories are being boxed out left and right. There is a chance, really, truly a chance for student debt cancellation. Today, the question isn't whether or not student debt is going to be canceled, but how much and how soon. And I think that's really to the credit of a lot of really intense organizing work that's happened over the last decade. And so we see right now we're standing in a moment in the student debt crisis that's different from any other moment because of this sort of decade of organizing work that's happened. And I think there's also another thing that's happened in the past 2 years is that the pandemic has proven the federal government, the president has the power to cancel student debt. The same powers the Compromise and Settlement Clause of the Higher Education Act, what gave President Trump the authority to pause student debt payments in March 2020 could give Biden, were he to decide to use it, the authority to cancel all student debt in, tomorrow at brunch if he wanted to. He hasn't done this yet. And he's really hemming and hawing about his ability to do this. And so the Debt Collective, and hopefully you all, HELU, and with people across the country, are really turning up the heat right now. The payments, the federal student loan payments, are set to expire on, the pause is set to expire on May 1st. And there's, over the last decade, there's been petitions that have been sent to Biden. People have called their Congress people. There have been letters that have been sent, and there's still no action. And so at this point in time, it's time to get into the streets. It's time to take this into action. This is a moment for organizing. This is not a moment for letter writing, although please write any letters you want. And so we want to sort of offer a call to action for our labor movements to join this very pressing struggle that's impacting our students and impacting ourselves. I mean, the reality of contingent faculty who are indebted ourselves is really acute. So, Jason, do you have something to add here?
We're going to run out of time, and I want you to be able to put the call to action things on. I just want to add one quick point. Along the lines of capital digs its own grave, I know this might seem absurd at first, but it's worth thinking about. I think the neoliberals fucked up. And what do I mean by that? Normally, and we know this through our organizing efforts, it's really hard to get a bunch of debtors together in the same room, because the debtors are always working to pay their debts. And even if you can get folks in the same room, debtors, it's, because of the stigmas of our society, it's hard. Debtors don't want to talk about their debts in public. So there's a lot of shame and guilt associated with it. And so it's hard to get debtors together. But where there's a bunch of debtors all in the same space? On our campuses. And I think this is a tremendous opportunity to take advantage of the fact that we have all these debtors in our presence that we can organize. We just got to figure out the ways to do it, to create that critical oppositional consciousness against debt, to break down the debt ideologies, and then to talk to people about all right, what do we do on the local, state, and national levels? But we have all these debtors together in our presence. And so what are we going to do about it? And it's not just students, it's our fellow colleagues, it's our staff members, and so on and so forth. So that's all I got.
Absolutely. And I think, one of the things that it's going to take is taking massive action. And so this is, we have 4 minutes to give some very concrete calls to action that we're calling on you to bring to your colleagues and to your locals. And there's we're going to go through them fast, but there's basically 4 main ways that we're encouraging folks to take action. To pass resolutions with your labor unions, with your faculty senates, with your student governments, if we have students on the call, or student governments, who I know my crowd, with our fucking grad locals, thank you very much, way better than student government. To consider having teach-ins with your students to talk about the debt that that they are learning under and we are teaching under, to have a Take Your Debt to Work Day, and to get to Washington, D.C. on April 4th. The Debt Collective, along with a number of coalition partners, including HELU, is having a massive day of action to demand President Joe Biden picks up the pen and cancels all debt. So we're sort of hoping to coordinate a series of actions to go along with April 4th. So in a second, I'm gonna throw a link in the chat that has a toolkit, if you will, a one-pager that says more about each of these things. But quickly, the resolutions, we've seen labor unions have begun to pass resolutions calling on Biden to cancel student debt. A grad local in Western Mass, I'm blanking on the UAW, I'm blanking on the number, passed a resolution that eventually made it all the way up to the Western Mass Area Labor Federation to call on Biden to cancel student debt. This is a big deal. 30,000 union workers are saying, Biden, do the right thing, pick up the pen and cancel student debt. So we have some materials available if you would like to bring that into your local. This is very much inspired by our colleagues and comrades in the K-12 world. We're calling April 4th as a Take Your Debt to Work Day. And what this looks like is wear a red t-shirt and put on your shirt a piece of masking tape, a piece of paper with the amount of debt you have, or if you don't have debt or you can participate as an ally to look up, the average amount of student debt. One of the things that makes debt very difficult to organize around and partially has naturalized it as a mechanism of inequality is that people personally experience debt with a lot of shame. And the moment we can begin to start to talk about the debt that we have and to talk with one another about the debt that we have, we begin to make steps towards making these debts powerful and shared together. So this is a great thing to do, to publicly take your debt to work day. The other thing is to come to DC, April 4th, a day of action where if you're within striking distance, please come. We are organizing buses from New York, from Philly, from Baltimore. Some folks from Florida are organizing a bus. So we're really excited for this. There's a bit.ly, pick up the pen, Joe, for more information. And then finally, if you are willing to take the time or able to take the time to have teach-ins with your students or on your campus to more sort of deeply dig into this issue, we have a few notes about what that could look like. So I think that's Jason, anything you want to close?
No, I want to continue to hear from the other folks, and then, again, just thank you, everyone. And yeah, let's try and build some power across all of education and think of education as turning a debt struggle, and look forward to seeing you all on the streets and otherwise. So thank you so much.
Thanks, y'all.
Thank you both. Really appreciate it. Thanks, everybody. And I'll invite Barbara and Naomi to join from New Haven, and we'll start a conversation. Nice to meet you, Barbara. Welcome. Thank you for talking with us at HELU. Let me just say, I love the number of Naomi showing up at the HELU Summit. This is awesome. Hi, welcome. So let's introduce ourselves, or I'll ask you to introduce yourselves. Barbara, if you'll start us off.
Yes, my name is Barbara Vareen. I am the staff director at Local 34 Unite here in New Haven. Naomi. And then I'll just say
Hi everyone. I'm Naomi Darbell. I'm 23 years old. I'm a Mexican immigrant who grew up in Texas, but I'm in my last year of undergrad here in New Haven at Yale. And I can tell a little bit about what Students Unite now is, and then I'll pass it to Barbara to talk about just what Local 34 is. But Students Unite now, which I just call SUN, basically we're a group of undergrads here in New Haven that has been around fighting alongside the unions and New Haven Rising since 2012. I've personally been organizing with SUN for 5 years now because I took a gap year. And I started organizing with SUN because I needed full financial aid that Yale promised me I would get. And it actually just doesn't go as far as Yale claims it does. And so I started because of that, and then I stayed because we're fighting for racial and class equity in so many ways with this coalition, both on campus and across the city. And our coalition has had a really great year this past year with some big wins, and I'm excited to share those with you as we talk more. Barbara, I'm gonna pass it to you.
Okay. My name is, like I said, my name is Barbara Vareen. I'm with Local 34. We are the clerical and technical workers on Yale's campus. We also have Local 35, which is our service and maintenance union. New Haven Rising, as Naomi said, is our community organizing, section. And we have Yura. When people retire from Yale, they're never done. We have a Yale retirees that stands with us in our fights with the university. They're a $40 billion institution. They have money, but we have people power. And I'm going to pass it back to Naomi to talk about some of our wins that we have successfully won this year after having 10 years of fighting it. And I'll go into a little bit about what some of those fights were.
Thanks. Yeah, like Barbara said, this is a coalition of like students, grad students, university staff, residents in the community, and it's a community with generations and diversity that just like covers all the ground, and that makes it possible to really organize each other on each other's issues by our stories, and that has helped us win fights that you can't win without that kind of coalition. So a really good example is in the Sun fight. Our main demand for a long time was the elimination of the student income contribution. And that fight since 2012, we just hit like this, we've hit wins along the way, but we hit like a really true, incredible milestone just this past semester. And to me, like in undergraduate organizing, having a 10-year consistently escalating fight is just not possible without the kind of institutional memory and institutional knowledge that comes from being part of a broader movement with infrastructure across grads, staff, and community members. So we've been able to train generations of leaders in Sun and learn how to run successful story sharing campaigns and canvases and rallies and town halls. And that's what has let us win really big on financial aid and start punching higher now that we're starting to fight the university on mental health care. So just to kind of explain a little bit about the student income contribution and why it took so long to win. I mean, we kind of had to shift perception of the SIC or student income contribution. What it is it's basically this gap in financial aid. It's like thousands of dollars that Yale can both advertise full financial aid about, but then kind of keep it separate and just leave low-income students totally responsible for. And like if my parents, like I have a full financial aid package, my parents can't help me at all. Like the university knows that, but they keep this kind of sneaky policy in place. And so we really, through our stories, were able to shift this from like a niche problem that like administrators were telling me to my face as a first year, like we don't have this policy, it doesn't exist. We were able to shift it from that to this like social disgrace. And we did a set of civil disobediences a couple years back, and like the local 35 president wrote an op-ed in support of us. And we've had union members like at our rallies there alongside us with New Haven Rising members, grad students. So really having this like 10-year fight that ended up just last semester winning like $7,500 more per undergrad of financial aid. Like that goes such a long way in my life, and I'm on my way out of this school, but for everyone who's coming in after me, it's gonna go a really long way. So I think that's like one fight that really we won because we are part of this big coalition and can keep fighting. And now we're kind of moving into mental health care. And I guess just to share a little bit about that fight. Well, I mean, first of all, I think we believe we can win it because we've seen Local 33, who are the grad students fighting for a union at Yale. We've seen them win on mental health. And so it really makes us like know that we can win too. Because we have like months-long wait times here at Yale. Like I waited several months for therapy when I really, really needed it. And so, I think especially over the past year and a half, when a lot of Sun's undergrads were just remote and scattered, having this like movement that was actually, decided to not look at a pandemic, say like, oh, we have to shrink our demands, but like look at this pandemic and say, we have to aim higher and we're going to fight for revenue for the city. We're going to fight for, really good union contracts, and we're going to fight for mental health care in the undergrads. That's kind of what really kept us going, I feel like, in Sun. And so it kind of all came together at May 5th of last year, where we had this like incredible 800-person car caravan, like 200 people on the ground, 800 people in their cars, just like completely showing the university how together we were against their austerity. And it's no accident that the following semester, like we saw so many different wins. And I want to pass it over to Barbara to talk about all those wins and how really, really cool they are.
I want to talk about how we got to those wins because it's been I would like to say it's been like for Naomi it's been 10, but for Local 34 and 33, now local 33. It's been 20 or more year fight. We decided in 2003 that we could no longer be fighting the university on our own as a union, and we needed to make a real partner of the community, and making the community a real ally with us, right? If we was going to be successful. So we started that campaign. It was a contract year. We started that campaign saying that we was going to win, we was going to settle 4 union contracts. We was going to settle local 34 contracts, and we wanted to double what we had because we was making very low wages. Like, you really couldn't really support your family on the wages that we had. We had good benefits, but we could not live off of the wages that we had. In local 35, we was gonna, the hospital workers, the cafeteria workers at that time was negotiating a contract, and they was barely making a little bit above minimum wage. And so we wanted to settle 4 good contracts. And we wanted GSO at the time, which is now local 33, we wanted them to become a union because we needed more union density on Yale's campus. That's the way you beat people. You got to have more people to beat people that have a lot of money. And so we went after Yale. We went after the tax exempt status. We went after the hospital for medical debt, and saying they had all this money for medical debt, and they were suing people. They were suing their own workers because they couldn't pay their debt, while they sat on a whole pile of free bed fund money that was supposed to be geared towards paying people. In that year, we won that they forgave a ton of people debts, thousands. They forgave millions of dollars in medical debt to their workers and to people in the community. We then went after in 2011. That was in 2003. In 2011, a bunch of our members came because Yale has this relationship with our city, because they have the biggest employer. They had this relationship with our city where nothing got done unless Yale said it got done in our city. So what a lot of our members came to us and was like, we want to change that. They wanted to run for public office. We was also in the middle of contract negotiations at this time, and we didn't think that it would work, right? We was like, okay, first it was like 3 or 4 people, then it was like 10 people, and then it was like 18 people. We have a city council of 30 people, and a bunch of our members, like, we wanted to change. We live in this city, we work in this city. We needed to not only change our working environment, but we also needed to change our city. And so we then backed our members to actually run, so that there could be a change, right? Because our city was dying, and the only place that was growing in our city was anything that Yale touched grew, but everything else in our city was going bad. So we partnered up with our members and we ran them for re-election. It worked for us because at that time, Yale said to us, like, y'all playing politics. And we was like, no, what we want to do is we want to level the playing field for not only us, but for people in the community. And we won 17 of our 18 races. And it really did change the dynamics of the city, because we was able to set an agenda for our city that talked about crime and public safety, and talked about jobs, right? And also in that year, in 2011, we created New Haven Works. You might have heard from Melissa Mason that spoke on Thursday that talked about New Haven Works. That became a part of our contract, and that became a part of us fighting Yale to create equity in our city, because people need jobs in our city. We also won great wages, but you can't be the only people in town making great wages. You got to bring other people in that town up with you. And so we made a firm commitment in our union to, like, make sure that we are real partners with the community, making sure that when we move up, we want to move everybody else up with us. And so we did those things in 2011. And we also made a hiring agreement with Yale I think it was 2011 or 2016, after we formed New Haven Works, was to hire 1,000 people from the and 500 of those people in New Haven residents, and 500 of those people from the neighborhoods of need. We had to, and then we had to get our members on board to be like, we need to hire people, and explicitly people from the Black and brown neighborhoods, right? We have to, you just can't just like say 1,000, because then they'll start importing people, which they try. They'll start counting postdocs, right? They'll start counting people who that's not going to stay long. They'll bring people in, but we wanted it to be intentional that we needed to hire the Black and brown folks that live in our neighborhoods, so that we can bring, not only that we can make be good, but we got to bring the neighborhoods and the communities up with us. I think at one point in time, I'm gonna pass this back over to Naomi to talk about what was her first experience, because and talk about her first experience in the union, in a summer program that we do, and that our international union do, that we run locally.
Yeah, so Unite here in the summers sometimes runs Organizing Beyond Barriers. And so we've had some folks from all across the coalition take part in that paid internship in the summers. So I've done it twice now, and those times we've been, I've gotten to, one, like be part of the team that's learning to launch every Canvas, like learning to run a program in earnest from start like to finish, and getting, talking to like 4,000 people one-on-one across the city about local hiring, about what they want to see Yale doing, and writing like statements, on people's front porches, and just like meeting so many people across the city and building consensus and a way to show that and deliver it to Yale. And so that was, one of my early experiences kind of moving forward with folks in Sun and the unions. And I think that like, that's actually like those experiences, just like going out on the doors with someone from 33, with someone from Local 34, and just like having the experience of doing the work together, I think is really what kind of helps us all feel like we are one coalition and we understand each other's issues and like are really in it together. So I kind of want to talk about some of the challenges of having that kind of like really, broad coalition and building it and maintaining it, and how like we kind of address it in Sun. And then I'll pass it back to Barbara to talk about that too, in 34. But basically, like, I think in the undergraduate organizing, it's a very self-selected group of people. Like, speaking for myself, like I know that I came into Yale, like, someone who's very afraid, someone who's very like under pressure to kind of keep my head in the books and like just, go after like this kind of set of steps that I'm supposed to do to kind of basically learn how to be a boss, right? And I think, the other kind of big challenge among undergrads is that they kind of just want to run their own campaign sometimes without talking to workers or residents or just people who are in other parts of the university. And, specifically like these past few years, like we've seen a lot of growing interest in New Haven Rising's campaign to push Yale on revenue in the city among the undergrads. And I think a big challenge was learning how to channel that and channel people's good intentions into working with this big coalition and not like apart. So I think one way we've addressed that is like organizing one-on-one and bringing people out to coalition events and really pushing each other to connect our experiences with other people in our coalition. And I think that's how we see stories like my former roommate going from like, like sleeping through a canvas to pushing people to come canvas with her for New Haven Rising, and like actually identifying more with other working class people in New Haven than with like the Yale administration. So that's like kind of one set of challenges in like kind of keeping this coalition going among the undergrads. And I guess like another set would be that Yale loves to use undergrads as bargaining chips. Like if we let it, like it will turn to Local 33 and say like, sorry, grad students, like we can't increase your stipends because we have to give financial aid to the undergrads. And then it'll turn to New Haven and say like, sorry, we can't increase our contribution to the city because we have to invest in our dorms or something. And like, we got to take care of these like young people, whatever. But then they tell the undergrads like, sorry, you have the student contribution and you have to wait forever for therapy. So like pushing students to actually go and meet people who are affected by that false scarcity and see how they're affected themselves. That's kind of how we make, connections between the dots. And we are constantly thinking about parts of our coalition when we're designing our timeline. Like, we're looking for opportunities to get people canvassing together, like doing lab visits together. Like, my first Sun Action ever was a joint photo campaign with Local 33, talking about building an academy that's ours. So an academy that's going to support women and support students of color, both at the grad and the undergrad level. And like that, totally drew me in, because it was thinking about my future at the time, right? So that's kind of how we show Yale that we're together. Like, just last semester, we delivered 660 photos that were they were against subcontracting in the library, so protecting 34 jobs. It was about pushing Yale on its revenue contribution to the city and pushing Yale on our financial aid and mental health demands. So that we build that kind of consensus on all of our issues, and then we show it to Yale. And I think that's been really effective. Barbara, do you want to talk a bit about the challenges?
Yes, I'm going to talk about 92 million ways those challenges was well worth it. I just have to put it like that. This year, we settled our contract, which that's not counted in the 92 million. That's what we won for our community. We settled a great contract. We won great benefits. We won great wages. But what our members are most proud of is the campaign that we ran around Yale Respect New Haven, right? And I'll talk about the challenges, but we won $52 million that Yale will be given to the city of New Haven over the next 5 years. And we won $40 million in pilot payment that our city was not getting, since Yale was a super tax exempt organization. But the challenges are real, right? Because how do you prioritize? How do you build consensus of who program is going to take precedence and when, and the timelines? And how do we get our members there, right? We have on Local 34, a bunch of our members are suburban people who don't live in the city of New Haven and don't understand why we needed, for a long time, didn't understand why we needed to prioritize local hiring and invest in the community, in our community program. I know myself, when I first started working at Yale, I didn't understand why GSO was important to us. I was like, they would tell, when we was negotiating, they'll say, oh, the students are going to come. And somebody said divide and conquer. Yes, divide and conquer. They were like, these are rich people. We pay their tuition. We give them a good stipend. We give them all these things. So we didn't think they were workers. We was like, oh, they're just students. They're students, they're getting all this money from Yale. They're rich, they're only going to be here for 7 or 8 years and they're going to go. But then as we started really talking to one another and learning and forming our partnership with GSO and with the other organizations, we was like, we all need one another, because we could not beat the giant without having more people power on the ground. We started a strategy group of our leadership to actually make sure that we was talking to each other and making sure that we wasn't overlapping on our programs and as we was setting up our program. And we made sure that there was a crescendo that touched every organization as we move forward. But those were challenging because our members was like, we should be our priority. They should be their priority. Why? And getting people to believe, understand why we are so important to one another. We will put out PowerPoint presentations. We will have meetings at our membership meeting. We made sure that we invited each organization to our membership meeting to talk about what they was working on. We brought it through our leadership structure, so that we can build consensus, because it's hard to tell people why somebody else's issue is more pressing than their issue is today, and how we need them. It's them today and it's us tomorrow. So those were some of the challenges that we face in bringing our leadership together, bringing our members. Like, we have 3,800 members. Local 35 have 2,000 members. So that's 5,000 people, over 5,000 people that you actually have to go out and have conversations with. So they're not voting down budgets that said that we should be funding some of this stuff. And so, but I do think that when we look at the victories we won this year, we won on every single front. Sun won, New Haven Rising won, 34 won, 35 won. We are winning now. 33 is what we have at our table, and 33 is gonna win their union. So I'm very proud of that, and I'm very proud to be a part of an organization that's gonna be pushing that and that for everybody to win. I did forget one of our organizations, 217. That's our hotel and cafeteria workers in Connecticut. They throughout the state. They are doing new organizing. Organize. Somebody once gave me a book, and every page of that book said how you win, organize. The second page, organize. The third page, organize. The way we win is that you always have to organize, because there's more power when we all stand together. I'll turn it to Naomi for I don't know if this is last words.
Yeah, so thank you both really very much for this, Barbara and Naomi. So hopefully you can stay on and answer questions about New Haven, but I want to invite Arlene and Billy to come up so they can talk about their experiences together in UTLA and Los Angeles and the work that you're doing. Arlene, hi.
Hi,
How are
thank
you?
you so much, Naomi. It's good to be here. And it's great being a part of this panel with Stacy Davis-Gates, really laying that foundation, and then the different panelists really adding to that. So I'm here with Billy Easton from Reclaim Our Schools Los Angeles, and I'm the Secretary of United Teachers Los Angeles and the bargaining chair. So just to start with, and he'll share what we've been up to today, because we just came from an event that was pretty exciting. But I'm going to start by just painting this picture. UTLA was on strike for several days in January of 2019. Do you know about that strike? Yeah, looks like I'm getting some, yeah, all right. And we were negotiating from the top floor at City Hall at the invitation of the LA mayor, who wanted to help resolve the impasse. We knew the end of the strike was near when the mayor came into our negotiations room looking kind of shook up and overwhelmed. And he said, and I quote, "There are 60 to 70,000 people down there," end of quote. So our bargaining team opened up the windows, we looked down, and we saw an endless stream of people in red with signs and umbrellas, and they were making a whole lot of noise. And I'm just going to show you this picture here. I believe I can share the screen just quickly, just show you this picture here, that bargaining is about power. Okay. All righty, you can see that, right? So the mayor did the math and knew that the UTLA educator strike had widespread public support with double our membership. If you look at the numbers, the people on the street, he said we won the hearts and the minds of the city of LA, that we won the hearts and minds. We had the support of 300 labor unions in LA County who adopted schools, had press conferences for us, and brought a fleet of fire engines to a rally in support of our strike. Parents and community at school sites came to the picket line, bringing donuts and thanking their teachers and educators who were in tears, saying nobody has ever thanked us before. And Reclaim Our Schools LA, our strongest parent-student community alliance, they held their own actions, including events and rallies in the evening at the home of the superintendent and school board members, which really shook them up, by the way. If you look at Wikipedia, their answer as to why LA teachers went on strike is, and I quote, "for increased wages for teachers and support staff, larger school budget, smaller classrooms, and other issues," end of quote. They, of course, neglect to mention what we really went on strike for, and also our common good wins that included green space on campus, an immigrant defense fund, 40 community schools, and restrictions on charter schools, and our number one student demand of ending random searches, which are not random, by the way, but target Black and brown students for weapons. Our strike was a huge win for LA educators, our students, parents, and our neighborhood where they live. And I'm just going to show this. Let's see. I'm just going to stop right there because I'm having trouble showing this. I'm going to stop. There we go. But they won because of our collective power. And as the last panelist, I believe Barbara was saying, our organized power and our unity. So just coming back, okay, how did this happen? How did we get there? 80,000 people, 70,000 people on the street. Well, back in 2014, a progressive leadership team was elected to the union, similar to CTU when they elected a new leadership team who wanted to transform our union with a bold vision centered around the schools LA students deserve. And we wanted to invest in our neighborhood schools, fight charters, stop school closures, and what we call co-locations, what are charter schools on our campuses, and the privatization of public education. So at first we led by bringing together community organizations, and we started this roundtable. We thought it would be great to just see if we could work together with other community groups. But you know what? It didn't work. It didn't last long. We discovered that a lot of community organizations depended on corporate funders, and they ended up supporting private charter schools, and we didn't have any common ground. So then what we decided to do is form a coalition called Reclaim Our Schools Los Angeles with 4 anchor organizations. They were LA Alliance for a New Economy, or LANE, the Alliance of Californians for Community Empowerment, ACE, Students Deserve, which is a student-led organization, and United Teachers Los Angeles. We came to these organizations in 2014 with our head down, saying that we haven't been a good partner in the past, and that we really wanted to start a new relationship as equals around our common vision for racially just community schools. We wanted to build an authentic partnership of trust. And I believe it's really critical that I reinforce that coming as equal partners, because a lot of times unions, we kind of think we're the boss or something, right? We kind of come in a little cocky, but we came with our heads down, knowing that we failed in the past. And we wanted to embrace bargaining for the common good as essential and part of our bargaining. So this is what led us to that powerful strike, and how we continue to strengthen our relationship in further ways after the strike to the present. And so what I want to do is introduce Billy to share from his perspective, or the community perspective, and to amplify too that our partnership goes way beyond the strike. It goes way beyond bargaining. So take it away, Billy.
Thank you, Arlene. My name is Billy Easton. I'm the director of Reclaim Our Schools Los Angeles. And it's especially exciting for me to go right after our friends from Unite here, because I used to work for the International, and I worked in Connecticut. I worked closely with 217. I spent a lot of time in the New Haven office, and I'm glad to hear the phrase local 33, because I knew GSO. And so now that there's a local number there like that, that's really hot. And you guys are a great inspiration. Arlene and I just came, in fact, today from a rally, a great big launch rally led by a dynamic Black student organization here, Students Deserve, and a whole coalition that we're part of, the Police Free Schools Los Angeles Coalition. And we're there for police-free schools, getting the police police department. LAUSD has the largest school police department in the country, $52 million. After we got $25 million cut, they still have $52 million. And, it's a real testament to how much UTLA has struggled with the issue of what real solidarity and real partnership means. That UTLA's ready to join with community organizations in demanding an end to school police. And that means that, you have the police union sitting up there and saying, wait, well, they're our sisters and brothers, but they're not with us, and saying that kind of stuff and worse than that in public. But it's really important because this is about justice, and unions are about justice. Community struggles are about justice, and we need to be on the same side. And that means we need to struggle with each other. I do want to say, I have been on the other side of this, where I've been on the community side, and we're supposed to be in coalition with unions, where the unions crapped out on us, really, and they didn't really lean in. They're like, say the right words, but then when it's time for the fight, they're nowhere to be seen. In fact, they're snuggling up with the politicians who are causing the problems, So, it's important really for unions to really, it's all about that broader sense. I was a union organizer too, and so it's about the broader sense of who your members are and what they're about. They're not just about wages and benefits. Educators, people don't go into teaching for the pay and benefits. They're committed to learning, students teaching and learning into their students, and so that's what this struggle really comes down to. And the strike and the fight around that was incredible. That was before my time here, but that was a very incredibly inspiring victory. And since then, there's been a lot of more that has happened as well. And so I mentioned the $25 million cut to the school police here. So Students Reserve, which is one of the 4 core members of Reclaim Our Schools LA, really has led that fight. And we got the $25 million cut, plus we got the school police. They are not allowed to be stationed on campuses anymore. They can only come when called. So no longer when students are going into a school is the first thing they're seeing is some cops. And, so that really reduces the sense of criminalization. We want to eliminate the school police entirely. And that money is needed for much more important educational things that need to happen. In fact, with the cut of the school police, we also won a huge victory through this whole coalition, broader coalition than just our coalition, called Black Student Achievement Program, which ended up being $100 million invested in specifically concentrated in schools with high proportions of Black students, social workers, counselors, restorative justice coordinators, Black studies programs. So really positive alternative to the school police, things that will work much better to address issues of student safety and well-being than school police ever would. So again, that's that coalition piece. It's really important from the community side, because I've been on both sides of this coin. Really important to have strong union partners, because unions usually have more power, and so it's mutually beneficial. And we have a bigger struggle in our heart, besides for all of us. Some other things, we have set up a structure in place where there are 7 school board districts in Los Angeles. And while Reclaim Our Schools doesn't get involved in elections, some of our member groups do, but we do not. We do get involved in pushing the school board to deliver on issues. So we have organizing in each one of the 7 board districts, a board district team of parents, students, and educators together to pressure those school board members. So they're feeling pressure from each part of it's not even just the city, because LA Unified School District covers a lot of communities. So from each part of the district, they are feeling pressure. We've had school board members say, I've never been in a meeting with a group that was parents, students, and teachers together, and educators together. We had some big victories last year as a result of this. We, in addition to the role of the things I already talked about, we won an expansion. So during the strike, there was 30 community schools that were won. We won 40 more since then. And the community schools are like really the model for how to reform schools that have emphasized the engagement of parents, students, educators, but also focus on supports for students and families, bringing in community partners, health clinics in schools, all kinds of, it's a real different outlook of what a school should be. We won really important victory on a lot of health and safety issues, because in COVID, there's a popular narrative that everybody wanted the schools reopened. And that's mostly was coming, not only, but mostly coming from very vocal, mostly white and upper middle class and middle class parents. All the polling data all across the country and our experience here on the ground in LA showed that Black and brown parents were much more skeptical, and Asian parents too, of reopening schools too quickly, much more worried about the consequences. So when UTLA approached this fight, they didn't just try to do it alone, they did it in partnership. The LA Times was running with the other narrative, and we put a report together that showed that they were overrepresenting, in their quotations, greatly overrepresenting parents from upper middle class areas, whiter areas, and underrepresenting Black and brown parents. And in fact, again, even local polling showed that Black and brown parents didn't want the schools to reopen. They were afraid. So the victories we won on that were the joint victories, that got health and safety protection. So LAUSD has the strongest protocols on COVID of any school district in the country. Whenever other districts were looking for tests, COVID tests, LAUSD already had contracts to have their own testing available, so that there was like really strong protocols, and it's really helped in slowing the spread of the pandemic here, even though obviously, like everywhere else, it's been terribly hit and a lot of death and loss. But it would have been a lot worse, not just in the school district, but throughout the area. And then I give you, we also had a big victory on preventing some privatization funding, sort of a voucher type plan here, which was, again, came upon us. It looked like it was greased to go, but because we had the coalition already in place, we didn't just put it together at the last minute. We were able to beat that and beat it back. And that was a really important victory. And now we're headed into the next round of common good bargaining with the Beyond Recovery platform. And, it's really exciting. UTLA has been really receptive to the community demand. So in their platform, I'm going to, tell a couple things that are in there and then kick it back to Arlene. But some of the things that the community brought to the table were converting vacant LAUSD properties into housing for there are 20,000 unhoused students in LAUSD. LAUSD should be, helping lead that. So we're going to be demanding that when UTLA goes to the table. We're looking for, totally end the criminalization of students in LAUSD. We're looking for more community schools. We're looking for, one of the biggest, in one of the sessions I facilitated of parents and community members and students about what they wanted, there was so much emphasis on climate justice and very practical, and both practical and big picture, whether it's about healthy food and green space in schools, or about like the curriculum, that we should change. So these are just some of the examples of some of the really, I would say, pretty revolutionary type things that are in there because of the fact that this is a real partnership. I'm going to kick it back to Arlene to take us home on the Beyond Recovery work.
Thank you, Billy. And as Billy said, we did have the golden standard on health and safety, and we negotiated around 20 side letters when the pandemic started. And the district was basically afraid of us. They wanted our support on the health and safety standards that they were going to impose, including mandatory vaccinations for all staff and then for students from 12 and up, and other measures. So the strike the results from the strike really led into the pandemic. And now we're moving into the next step, a new contract, a whole new contract. So it's 3 years later. And as Billy said, we've taken it even further than the past. We decided, let's go to our school sites, let's go to our community and say, hey, what if we could change would make the most difference to you? In other words, listening sessions, right? And just getting, let's get right down to it. What's really, really important to you? And so we heard from over 530 school sites. We heard from 30 itinerant groups. And then there were parent town halls that Billy was mentioning from our community groups. And then we got all the input and we put it together into a platform. And the platform has 7 planks. One is fully staffed schools through measures that attract and retain teachers. 2, equitable access to opportunity for all students. 3, equitable access to technology. We certainly had that digital divide. 4, support for students, families, and our school communities. 5, a safe school climate. 6, healthy green public schools, and 7, equitable school funding. So if you go to our website, vision.utla.net, we have the whole platform there and an explanation. So that's what we came out with. And then we took it back to our members and said, hey, we're going to have a vote. Is this what you see reflected in what you shared with us? Do you agree with this platform? And last week, the results came in after 3 days of online voting that 96% of our members said, yes, this is the platform they want, including the issues that Billy mentioned regarding climate justice, regarding low-income housing, regarding expanding our Black Student Achievement Program with resources focused on social emotional health and culturally relevant curriculum. We're working hard right now too on ethnic studies and moving that through our district. There's so many issues that we know our students and parents and community join us in. So that was that vote. And now we're in the stage of getting proposals that connect with the platform. And then our bargaining team will do the hard work of putting together a package that will take to our to the table, and that will include an expanded bargaining team. We decided to expand our bargaining team from, we usually had around 15, and then we would have the rank and file educators at the table. So we had like 20. We had one session with parents and community because the district wouldn't allow us to have more, but we just had that one session. But this time we're expanding bargaining to probably include hundreds after school. We haven't told the district yet, so we'll see how that goes. But we're very excited because the more that our members and the parents and communities are engaged, the more they're invested in the whole process, that is nothing but more power. So our intent is to just build from the strike and build at the bargaining table, build on the streets, because we're telling them, if you're going to be at the bargaining table, we need you, then you're all going to also going to be organizing. You're going to take it, you're going to communicate with the school members or with the community and work through those actions and escalated actions and build from there. So that's where we're at now. We're in this process and we're very, very excited to keep moving forward. And I just want to say one last thing is, yeah, here's the button that I got today from the Students Deserve. And it was so inspiring to just remember all the things that the students have led on and the students have done, and that we could be a part of supporting that really means so much to me and our members. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you both, Arlene and Billy. That's so awesome, so amazing. And I want to invite all of the panelists to come back up. So Sean, if you can, virtually bring us all back to the table and open the conversation up. We have about 10 minutes where we can respond to anything that you've heard. If you want to talk amongst yourselves, ask feel free to ask questions in the chat, but let's just spend this time talking about and thinking through the lessons that we've just heard today and how we can use them in our higher ed movement. And I will say really quickly, Sean, if you'll allow people to unmute themselves as well. But I'll give the panelists time to kind of react to each other if you want.
I'll just say one thing. I know from my time in Connecticut with Unite here, and I know from here that these things don't happen magically. There are a lot of one-on-ones, a lot of group meetings, a lot of chances for people to get their heads around things and have their voices heard, and and pushing people to develop as leaders and to take on their fears and overcome them, and take on those challenges. And it's that groundwork, that spade work to dig the garden so the plants will grow is so essential.
Jonathan, go ahead.
Not sure if that was the appropriate way to interact with the group, but thank you, everyone. What an amazing session. And my question is, coming from a graduate student, academic worker union situation in a college of education, what are some ways that K-12 rank and file or other union groups, union adjacent groups are interfacing with teacher education programs and like building solidarities with teachers in training, young professionals who are maybe less closely acquainted with some of these deep contradictions that I've been hearing talked about today. Thanks again.
Well, I'll just add that, yes, we're like, for example, UTLA has been part of the College for All coalition and fight, and connected to other, like we have Dolores Huerta Foundation at the community college. We have our labor unions join together and support training at the community colleges on labor ed in particular. But there are various ways, that we're trying to build with that connection with higher ed. And, I've been to many meetings at the community college as well as the state college level. And we've shared grants together. For example, we had a NEA grant, an immigration grant that we partnered with Cal State Northridge and a community organization. And we were delivering we were having dream centers at our high school campuses where college students would be trained and come and share and be a part of that. So there's so many different ways to have partnerships, but yeah, I think that needs to keep growing and building, and that we need to find ways to support the incredible poverty wages that our higher ed folks have, especially part-timers. So yes.
Here in Chicago, our coalition with our local 1600 is it is a sister local. We are actually housed in the same building. We work with them well, not exclusively, but in a lot of ways. But one in particular that may be worth sharing here is that we are members of the United Working Families Party here in Chicago. And Local 1600 is a critical member in that space. One of the things that we've done together is fight for elected representation in the city. Our school district is mayoral controlled. We won't see our elected school board beginning in 24 and fully in 26. Same difference for the city colleges here is that they don't have an elected board. but they do have elected community boards out in the suburbs for their community college members. And we worked hand in glove with them through the United Working Families Party to elect an individual to that space that represents the platform that you all are speaking about in terms of community, allyship, making it more accessible for those who need it the most.
Thanks, Joe Ramsey.
Thank you all. Just such a rich panel. There's scarce time. If I'm going back to I want to kind of connect the first to the last panel, or maybe it's really everyone, but this issue of debt. I'm wondering about, debt, of course, expresses increase in tuition. And also some students deal with that increased tuition, not through taking on debt, but through increased work hours. So I think it's really important that we be intentional about talking about working hours. I know at my campus, a lot of my students they can't do the work, because they're working 40 hours because they don't want to take debt. So I think it's an important thing that doesn't get emphasized enough. The other thing is that I wonder about debt, the future of, there's a past and a future of debt, right? I wonder sometimes once students have bitten the bullet on tuition, it's almost like too late for that. Like they almost like want to suppress the debt. Can we get them earlier? And this is why I'm connecting to the last panel and UTLA and CTU too. Like, can we get conversations about student debt going in our unionized high schools? Can we get conversation about the need to fight tuition before people already kind of bite the bullet and swallow the pill, and get more, like concrete solidarity, like getting students thinking about the fact that public higher ed should be a right and they shouldn't have to be earlier before they've been. And I'm also thinking about alumni, obviously, around debt, people who are repaying. I think it's brilliant to put students and faculty and staff on campus in conversation around debt, something they could fight for as equals, and that could really create a concrete basis for solidarity that's not just like doing this for you, but with you. So I think like debt, if we think about the whole process around debt, including the work hours, the tuition, and think about the life cycle of the debt, I feel like it could be a real uniter. And I guess my question is this happening at the K-12 level? Could it? And I mean, I'm an MTA here in Massachusetts, it's higher ed, and I feel like maybe we should try it here for MTA people on the call. But I'd love to hear if the rest of you are doing anything like that at the K-12, pre-K level, pre-K-12.
I just offer a quick response to that. So I think Joe points out a really difficult bind that students are put in, whereby you either take on loans that foreclose your future in order to study in the present, or you spend your whole present working so that you don't have the loans to come. And our students are in this terrible bind. And it's terrible for a lot of reasons, but it really messes with their education as well. And we know that, right? So if you're taking 15 hours to graduate, credits to graduate quickly, and or working 60 hours a week, all sorts of things happen to your education, and they're not good. About the K through 12 stuff, actually with, I was in Chicago not too long ago with Chicago Teachers Union folks, core folks, talking about the ways that the debt issue is a huge issue for K through 12 teachers. And, working with some folks there, Jackson Potter and some other people, about talking about how can we pass a resolution with CTU, and how do we get teacher unions across the country to fight for debt abolition and build those higher ed K through 12 bonds to do so. This is also, again, all the data shows, one of the reasons why we had BIPOC folks leaving the profession or not going into the profession is because of debt. And so it's just all these connectors come together around the debt issue that I think we can use to, as Stacy and others are saying, bargain for the common good.
I think here, and yes to everything that Jason just said. The idea of this was upended with COVID, obviously, in that, a lot of our focus is going towards being able to negotiate and secure safety agreements that make everyone safe in the school community. That being said, I think that the connections are obvious. I can speak from a very personal space about the debt and what that means what that meant for me becoming an educator versus something else. And, the hits you take financially, thank God I have a husband, who could afford, that had a GI Bill that made it possible. But the same type of space and infrastructure isn't there for many of us who decide to become public servants. And that too narrows the number of Black teachers, Black educators coming into the profession. I'm first generation, right? So the rest of that. So I'll just end with that one.
Stacy, I feel you. Amy, I'll let you ask the last question and then we'll start to wrap up.
Thanks, Naomi, and thanks everybody. It was amazing to end today with such a wide range of like really hardcore action, and it just had me thinking a lot because I've worked in 9 through 12 public schools, community colleges, and private institutions and public colleges. And the one thing I see is like a great potential right now to not just like give each other like a pat on the back that we're allied together, but actually building the coalitions that you're talking about. And I hear, Jason was talking about, we can use debt across like K through 12 community colleges, part-time workers, contingent staff, faculty, everybody. And I just wondered like, if you had anything to go out on advice on actions that are the best way forward to build something that's like a US education movement, rather than like a segmented by piece, but a US movement for education.
I think we should be able to take this in the next 4 minutes.
Just ballpark it, Eleni.
I mean, I think that's the question. And I think that's why we're here now is, movements aren't always something that happen in the future. They're happening right now. They've happened, on the road behind us and the road ahead and right here. But I think figuring out, I think Amy, what I'm really connecting with what you're saying is that it's, and also I think this is a comment that Billy mentioned too, is that like, it's one thing to say you're in struggle with other people. It's another thing to really actually show up and take some very risky, controversial positions about what solidarity can look like. Solidarity is best used when it's a verb. And I think that is these conversations are the beginning of that. I mean, I would love with this right now. There's a very urgent case where we can get some practice in between now and May 1st around student debt. I think this is really truly an issue that brings together K-12 teachers. It brings together prospective teachers. It brings together our students. It brings together, adjuncts, contingent faculty. So if I just want to sort of make a plug that if anybody wants to figure out how to get their muscles in action on this of what building a movement looks like please join this fight for student debt cancellation. It's not necessarily even because it's the most important, but I do think it's one that we could win if we move around it right. So pitch.
Yeah, I just wanted to jump in and add that, when we had the Red for Ed movement that, came about, a lot of that was about income inequality and poverty and teachers saying, I can't do this anymore. And I mean, we just have to link because that's all the same struggle and all the same fight. And I think we need to broaden. I think we do tend to think of K through 12 and not see the bigger educational picture and join together. But yeah, I think people need to just start by talking about it and seeing how we could take steps in that direction.
I think it's that book that Barbara has. One every page just says organize, right?
Organize, organize, organize. That is our answer. Thank you again, everybody. Thank you for agreeing to be on the panel, for such wonderful examples, illustrations, legacies of fighting and winning. Appreciate it all so much. Thank you all. And so it's a wrap on day 3 of a summit. Unbelievable. We have begun to really give serious shape to HELU today, and we're figuring out what it means to move forward in our 3 main streams of work: national coordinated organizing to ensure that our movement is moving forward in unison in recognition campaigns, contracts, work actions, and all areas where workers are organizing. Policy development to make sure we are writing the legislation and the rules that fund and govern our sector, and political organizing that helps us build the power we need to win the things we can achieve at the bargaining table. Tomorrow, we're going to finish discussing how to frame HELU's next steps. We're going to make some decisions together about how we move forward. And let's build a democratic, durable, and flexible organization that builds wall to wall, coast to coast, and transforms our higher education systems into public goods in the public interest. Thank you, everybody. Have a great night.